The persecution of Christians across the globe continues to be a huge concern for all of us here in America, as well as in other locales. And each year, Open Doors releases its World Watch List to track the countries where believers are facing the worst conditions. Well, the new list is now out for 2014, and we're going to get some of the details now from Dr. David Curry, who is president and CEO of Open Doors USA. It is wonderful to have you here, Dr. Curry.
Thank you so much, Janet.
I appreciate your being with us. All right, now let's go over some of this because a lot of people are a little unclear on the World Watch List. What is this? How do you put this together? How do you compile the information that you put out each year?
Well, the World Watch List is a ranking of the 50 countries where persecution of Christians for religious reasons is most severe. And Open Doors has historically worked with Christians in the most difficult places on earth. So this year, when we ranked it 1 to 50 based on a number of factors. Some of it has to do with the governmental oppression in other countries. You have situations where the government is a failed state, so they don't have the ability or the will to protect religious minorities like Christians in the country. But for whatever reason, these are the countries that are very dangerous, in some cases illegal, to be a follower of Jesus.
Well, that's right. Now, you had noted here that your methodology was published for the first time this year. How do you go about compiling the statistics? What do you rely upon in order to figure out which countries are the worst?
Well, we were meeting even with the State Department today to go over our methodology because they are very interested in how we do this. And what we do is we get down on the local layer in these countries. So, yeah, on the ground in North Korea, on the ground in Saudi Arabia, in Somalia, we're meeting with church leaders and finding out what's happening, trying to help them and serve them. And even the State Department doesn't have that layer of data. They're looking at the macro, trends, so to speak. So we really get right down in there, and then we measure it and give a point system based on what kinds of persecution, the levels of violence. In some cases, you have smash type events where you have bombings, like we had just at Christmas in Iraq, 2 bombings in Pakistan in the last couple of months. So you have those kind of big events, but in many cases, the countries have such total control, and religion and freedom of expression as far as faith goes is so limited that you don't hear about it, and it's almost worse in those cases.
Boy, it's awful to consider. There has been so much press, too, about the previous year that we've just left behind, 2013. And, more books have come out, more press has come out about the persecution of Christians worldwide. Would you say overall the persecution of Christians on this latest list has been ramped up significantly from previous years?
On every measure, this is the worst year we've seen in a long, long time. Certainly, it's twice what it was last year as far as confirmed number of martyrs, 1,200, over 1,200 this year that have been, twice that have been martyred this year as opposed to the year before. What it takes to get into the top 10 of our World Watch List, which is at worldwatchlist.us. People can go and look at all the different factors. What it takes to get into the top 10 is harder because of the violence and the pressure on the expression of Christian faith around the world.
Boy, it's so depressing. As you mentioned before, your number one country this year, again, North Korea.
Yes. North Korea is a very dangerous place to be a Christian. You're not allowed the freedom to read the scriptures, certainly to own a Bible. North Korea, as everyone I hope is aware, is a very unusual country anyway, a very oppressive country. But Christianity, because of its ideal of lifting up Jesus as God and as the Son of God, is a great threat to theocracies like North Korea that are trying to build up their leaders. Now 3 generations. Kim Jong-un is the latest of a family line of people who think they're God. And so Christianity is a threat to that. And of course, the tenets and the principles around Christian faith have a lot to do with independence and freedom and these kinds of things, which also are embedded in our faith, embedded in the teachings. Scripture, and so that's a threat. So you have a number of different things. But to be a Christian in North Korea is a brutal and inhumane thing to endure. We know from our sources on the ground, Janet, that there's a minimum of 50,000 Christians in concentration camps today.
Oh, my goodness. Well, there's a lot more to dive into. Dr. David Curry with us from Open Doors USA, talking about the brand new World Watch List, tracking the persecution of believers across the globe. We'll come back to this right after this break. You're listening to The Janet Mefford Show. 17 past the hour on the Janet Mefford Show. As we know, there are believers across the world who are persecuted just because they are Christians, and it is a terrible situation in many, many countries, as we've been hearing from Dr. David Curry at Open Doors USA. It's far worse in this latest year than it has been in previous years. Now, we were talking to Dr. Curry about this situation in North Korea, and you had mentioned an estimated 50,000 Christians are living in concentration camps there. One of the things I wanted to ask is, how is it, given the lockdown that is present in North Korea, that a lot of these people ever become Christians? I think a lot of people wonder about that. How do they hear the gospel over there?
Well, I think it's important for Christians here in the West to take heart, and there's a lot of lessons we can learn from persecuted believers. Remember, the New Testament was written by persecuted believers, so we sort of spring forth from those folks whose faith grew under pressure. One of the things we take away from the faith of these folks in North Korea is that they're carrying on. They believe, and they're sharing their faith. And we're seeing people who are converting to Christianity, who've come to understand and accept Jesus as their Savior. And we're encouraged by what's happening there. So they're sharing their faith. And they're living it out under great pressure, under great duress. But good things are happening even in the midst of all this horror and tragedy.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, a lot of press has been given recently to Dennis Rodman going over there to North Korea. Do those sorts of things help or hurt the Christians when you have an American hanging out with Kim Jong-un and trying to say, oh, North Korea, a great place to be?
Well, I think there's obviously roles for diplomacy when you have these sort of rogue regimes. But on every level, what Dennis Rodman is doing is irresponsible. And certainly for Christians, because if it gives the regime there sort of a sense or a patina of respectability in the midst of the horrors. And trust me when I tell you, the horror that these people face in these concentration camps are my briefings that I get from our folks in the field absolutely will turn your stomach. And so the fact that he's validating it seems to be validating. And I understand that he's a obscure and sort of an unsettled person himself, but in the larger sense, he's not a elected official. But right. It's still, I don't think it's responsible on any level.
Well, when you mention what they go through in the concentration camps, without getting too graphic, what sorts of things do Christians face over there?
Well, what I can tell you is what has been reported, certainly by 60 Minutes last year in a report on their concentration camps, and in the reports that the UN has published on these sorts of things. But you're talking about executions and tortures of an extreme kind. So people who are being killed by animals, under just horrible, horrible things. And these aren't stories that we make up. You can check the special reports on North Korea that the UN has put out. Just horrible things.
It's awful, awful. Well, there are others as well. You had mentioned Somalia, the first time at number 2. What is going on over there?
Well, the Middle East has seen a dramatic drop in Christianity because of extreme Islam. But what Somalia represents is the first time a sub-Saharan African country has leaped up to number 2 on our World Watch List. And we see a lot of countries in North Africa, or at least several, who are part of the watch list this year because that Islamic extremism is bleeding down into North Africa. And so that's a troubling sign. Somalia is clannish. There's warlords. There's instability there that are going to make it a very, very dangerous place to be. It is illegal in every sense to be a Christian in Somalia, on a governmental sense, in a clan and warlord sense. They're very much in danger.
It's scary. How many Christians live in Somalia?
Well, off the top of my head, I don't know, but I can tell you that it's a significant minority there.
Okay.
But unfortunately, those stats have not in my brain at this point.
Oh, no, that's okay. You have an awful lot of countries to remember, and I kind of caught you off guard there. Sorry about that. Another one that you mentioned in your top 10 is the country of Syria, and I guess this will surprise not very many people given what has been going on in the last year there, but we have seen terrific violence in Syria, and you call them, the least surprising newcomer on your list. Why?
Well, because of the civil war has put Christians in the crossfire. And if you look at sheer numbers of people who have been martyred for their faith this year, the largest number are in Syria. And you have a civil war where the rebel forces, so to speak, there are no heroes in this case. Yeah. The dictator is his own kind of a problem for his people. But these rebels and groups, some of them are mercenary, but they're all Islamic extremists, use Christians and attack Christians, both as scapegoats and as just general targets, because they want to eliminate Christianity for their Islamic extremist point of view, to embed their theology in Sharia law upon the rest of the country. So they've been caught in the crossfire, and hundreds of people have been killed for their faith in Syria, and it's going to be unsettled for some time.
Well, it seems that way. As you mentioned, there are no heroes over there, and it's very scary to consider. You know, when you look at the Middle East in general, obviously the biggest driver of persecution, as you say in your report, is Islamic extremism. You know, we have seen, churches eliminated in countries like Afghanistan and churches waning in other countries there in the Middle East. Why? Why do you think that there is such a rise in Islamic extremism and such a vacuum there that's allowing for the rise in this persecution?
Well, one of the things historically that Open Doors has tried to do is help Christians remain in their countries. And so there's a number of factors, one of which is that some of the Christians, if they have the ability to leave these countries, have fled. Yeah. And what we would like to see happen, certainly in Syria, but it's happening, we're fighting a trend here where Syrian Christians are fleeing the country. A few years ago, Syria was a fairly safe place to be a Christian because the dictator there was trying to create a majority out of a series of minority groups, and so protected Christians to some extent. Now they're under fire. They never had been before. And they're fleeing if they have the resources to do it. And some of them, even if they don't have the resources. So you have a number of factors. You have a squeeze where in some of these countries in the Middle East, many of them, it's very difficult to be a Christian. It's not something you want to do openly. You're encouraged, if you're an extremist, to even narc out, for lack of a better word, your family members who might convert, punish them, push them out. You lose your business. You lose your worldly goods. So there's a lot of pressure. There are the cases of violence where people are hurt or injured or killed. These kinds of things, the mixture of the squeeze and the smash of violence, are pushing people out in tandem with folks just fleeing under the pressure.
Boy, but as you have more and more fleeing, it creates more and more of a vacuum, doesn't it, for the Islamists to come?
It does.
Yeah.
It settles in, and then you have situations where in some of these countries you have a total vacuum of Christianity. Let me give you an example. Oman, which is on our World Watch list. When we go through and talk to expatriates who have left the country, who have fled, who would be Christians, we would say to them, who do you know in this country who is a Christian? We're trying to put together any data we can. We can't come up with 100 people that we can find who are followers of Jesus in the country of Oman because of the pressure, because it's illegal. You can't do it openly. You can't have scripture openly. So it's very, very difficult. Imagine that, a country with the heritage of Oman. There's a lot of beauty there, but it's extremely oppressive to anything other than Islamic extremism.
Terrifying. You mentioned other countries as well. One was the Central African Republic, making the list for the first time at number 16. That's kind of an interesting jump, isn't it?
It is, because they weren't even on the list last year, or at least not in the top 50. And the Central African Republic is one of these where we started to see it in the news. We've been tracking it. Last year it was just outside of the top 50 on our list. But you see these cases where bands of extremists are going around with machetes, attacking Christians, forcing Christians out of their homes at night. And it's a very unstable situation now. France has tried to send in troops to calm it down, but you're still seeing a lot of instability there. And the Central African Republic is on the verge of some very, very difficult things, and they're already experiencing very difficult things.
Well, when you talked about meeting with some officials in Washington about this, there have been some Christians who have been very disheartened, myself included, by how little this administration seems to be involved in religious persecution of Christians across the globe. Does this list give you some leverage in Washington, additional leverage to be able to get the government to get more involved in standing up for Christians worldwide?
Well, there has been a deafening silence from this administration on the subject of the persecution of Christians and religious minorities around the world. And so we're encouraging them to name an undersecretary of state who could deal with this subject, but they haven't done so.
Yeah.
Other administrations have done so. They're just very, very quiet on the subject. And I would say and they're standing alone in that. The EU is coming out, standing behind persecuted believers. You see the Vatican is making statements, obviously, but very strong, important statements coming out. It's really just the United States that is silent on this issue, and it's shameful.
It is shameful. And you know what? This is all the more reason that we need organizations like Open Doors to stand in the gap for these persecuted Christians, because you guys do so much, and we can't solely rely on our government for sure, can we?
Oh, no. This is a spiritual thing. Open Doors is a Christian organization. We want to support Christians to remain, to share the love of Jesus. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. We want to love the Muslim people. We want to example that love to them. That's what Open Doors is all about. But what we're hopeful is that this World Watch List is going to pull back the veil and show the injustice, show the brutality for what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this isn't a political movement in our mind. It's a spiritual thing, but we do need to advocate for our brothers and sisters.
We sure do. And I want to refer people over to your website. It's worldwatchlist.us, and you can see the list and download it for yourself. Dr. David Curry with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Curry.
Thank you, Janet.